What's up, guys? So today doing a rear wheel seal on a 2002 Dodge Ram 2500. First thing you want to do is get jacked up, put it on a jack stand. I jacked it up pretty high just because when you pull the axle out, if it's on a good downhill, you're gonna lose more fluid than you have to. I got the trailer on, so I didn't want to turn it around. But next thing you're going to want to do is take all your lug nuts off, and then we'll get into it. Alright, so I got the wheel off. You're going to need a 21 millimeter half-inch ratchet and pry bar, most likely. What we're going to do is we're going to take off these caliper bracket bolts. You can take the caliper off and then the bracket if you want, but sometimes it's easier just to take the bracket off with the caliper still attached. So I'll go ahead and do that and we'll go from there. Alright, so I got these bolts loose and out. Sometimes you can pry the caliper. There it is. And then it's hard to do with one hand. Just set it up out of the way, preferably so the line's not pinched, just like that. And then we'll pull the rotor off next. Alright, so got the rotor off, and as you can see, it's pretty wet in there. The problem I was having was my e-brake wasn't working as well as it should. So this is obviously caused it. So you want to clean that rotor up real good before you put it back together. Next thing we're going to do is take the axle out. I don't think you have to take the e-brake apart. If you want to replace the pads, probably be a good idea. I'm just going to clean it up. So pull this axle out. I think it's a 5/8 or 15 millimeter, and then we'll go from there. So it's actually a 14 or 9/16, and if yours are like mine, you're gonna want heavy duty impact or something because these things are tight. And next, you're just gonna pop this axle out. Have a drain pan ready. You're gonna lose some fluid. Looks like I might want to change my fluid. That was pretty dark. May just do that. Anyways, so you're gonna pull it out and then have a place to set it. So we'll get back here in a second. All right, and then after that, we're gonna want to pull this clip out. Should be able to just pry it out. And then you need a 2 9/16 socket to get that nut off. And then after you get that nut off, if your hub's like mine, it's already loose. And then you're just gonna want to tap it to where that bearing is ready to come out. Grab it, set it down, and then your hub will come off completely. Alright, now we got the wheel seal. This is a new one, exposed and ready to come out. I'm going to use a heel bar to get that out. If you don't have one, you can use a pry bar or screwdriver. And I'll try and show you how to do that in a second. But here's your oil seal, or your wheel seal. Let's see if we can focus here. You want the open end to face down, so there's no gap. You want the gap to be facing down. So this is what I'm going to be using to get that seal out. You just stick it under there, pry up. It's pretty nice. If you don't have one of those, you can use a screwdriver and a pry bar. Get your pry bar in there and then use the screwdriver. It's better if you have two hands as leverage to pry that seal out. Alright, so I got that seal swapped out. After you get the seal out, you're going to want to check your bearings. I already checked that one. What you're looking for, you rotate it. You're looking for any scoring or pitting in the bearings. If you see any of that, you should probably replace it. Everything looks good here. I've cleaned up the spindle. The only thing I see is this right here, which it doesn't have a lip to it or anything, so I'm not worried about it. And then I just cleaned up the pads. I like to use starting fluid to get the oil off and then follow it up with some brake cleaner. When you're putting the seal in, I didn't have a seal installer, so what I used is this big ass socket. You want to just find something that's the same size and then just tap it in there with a hammer and make sure it goes in evenly. You'll feel it hit the bottom. It'll make a different sound, and then once you hit that, then you know it's in all the way. And then after you get the seal in, I like to use engine assembly lube. Just kind of lube up that seal portion, not heavy, just a little bit. And then also where the bearings ride, right there and there. And then we'll go from there. Alright, then after you get everything lubed up, the hub's ready to go back on. And you just want to put it in nice and flush. I'm trying to do this one-handed. Give me a second. Yeah, so that rear bearing or that inner bearing is gonna fight you a little bit because it's super tight. But just make sure it goes on, and then just kind of work it in there. You'll feel that seal pop into place, and then at this point we're gonna put the outer bearing back in. Just set it in there, then put the nut back on. And then when I took it off, I just marked how many threads were showing. I don't know if there's a certain torque spec this is supposed to be. So I've always done it. I just do it by feel. Everything's a lot harder with one hand. But once I get that nut back on, I'll show you what I mean by doing it by feel. I've never had any issues with it doing it that way. So, alright, so if you're using the old nut, which I'm sure they recommend to use a new one because it's a nylon nut, but you can see exactly where that clip went in. So what you're looking for is for it to spin semi-freely. It's a little cold, so. But then also you're going to want to shake it back and forth, and you should be able to hear it click just a little bit. Should have just barely any movement in it, and then you know you're good. And you want to make sure these surfaces are clean for the gasket. And you're just going to slide this in until it gets to a point. And we're not on. Pull it back out. Rotate. Still not on. Pull it back out. Rotate. Still not on. And there we are. Put all the bolts back in with some Loctite, and then that's that. And then while you're in here, you might as well adjust your e-brake. And the way to do that is by turning this nut right here. One way will push the brake pads out, one way will bring it back in. You just want to adjust it so that when you put the rotor on, it's a tight fit putting it back on. Alright, so we got the rotor back on. We got the caliper back on. If you opted to not take the caliper off, it's just tight. You got to line those brake pads up with the rotor. Just perfect. Slide it back on. Line your bolt holes up. Cinch her down. Alright, so I got the tire back on. Figured that was pretty self-explanatory. But after you get the tire back on, you want to come down here to your differential and check your fluid. Daddy. I've got the dogs down here checking. See if I'm okay. Yeah, you're going to check the plug, or pull the plug, and your fluid on level ground should be right at the base of that plug. I'm actually going to change my fluid because of how black it was, so I'm just going to do that next. But yeah, there you go. That's how to change your wheel seal. Thanks for watching.